Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, A Guide to Intentionally Optimizing BIM Workflows. This webinar is brought to you by Applied Software. My name is Caitlin Dunn, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. All right, here we go with the intro video. Hi, and welcome to this Applied Software webinar. We're glad you could join us today. Get more out of the webinar by clicking on the icons at the bottom of your screen. You can resize these. This button leads to resources. This button adjusts the volume. Just don't push this one. I'm watching you. Be sure to find Applied Software on social media and on our website, asti.com, where we'll empower you to discover what's possible. You can also find a complete schedule of upcoming events, on-demand webinars, and training on our calendar at asti.com/calendar. This is being recorded for your convenience. You'll be receiving an email with the recording link for future reference. And make sure to stick around. We'll answer questions at the end. See you there. All right. So, as the video mentioned, you can find our schedule of upcoming events and webinars on our calendar, so be sure to check that out. And I am very happy to introduce Lance Kirby and Chris Dell, our speakers for today. Lance is a director of AETG Services, and Chris is a territory account consultant at Applied Software, and both have years of experience in the industry. Thank you so much for joining us today, guys. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate it. I'm going to jump right into a little bit about why we're here. And frankly, trying to understand why you're here, because I think the title for me is trying to be very provocative. When you think, okay, I want to make things better, I want to make my workflow better, but I also think I've got to be intentional about it. When we mean intentional, is that you just don't kind of stumble into it. You don't kind of guess about what you're doing. You got to kind of plan this stuff out, but you also need to know the whys. Why is this important? But I think, to me, if I were coming to this webinar trying to understand why or how and why I need to optimize, I think there might be some challenges you're facing. And so some of these things might resonate with you. So, you may be in the process of trying to implement BIM-based workflows. And when we say process, it might be you're into year 5, right, or year 10, and you're still trying to get things running on all cylinders. And you may, frankly, feel like you're missing some efficiency or missing some effectiveness, or maybe a little both. And it's also, maybe not the how you're doing things. It may be about what you're doing, right? You may feel like you have the right processes in place, or maybe you don't. Maybe you feel like there's some part of BIM as a workflow that you're missing, right? And then I also think that leads to what could we be doing beyond our typical workflow, which I think is a very interesting challenge, being able to extend things or services that we haven't been able to do in the past, right? What are we missing? What opportunities are we missing in the marketplace? What are our competitors going after that maybe we haven't thought of, right? So I think all these things are very relevant to what we want to talk about.
So Lance,
go ahead.
When you mentioned BIM, talk a little bit about what you mean by what does that encompass?
Yeah, great question, Chris. I mean, when we think about BIM, obviously a lot of people think just about the tools, right? It's it's Revit, it's BIM 360, it's those kind of tools, but they're part of a larger ecosystem and initiative at design, construction, even owners. So we think about not only the tools to author and to analyze and to share information, but also the processes associated with those things. Being able to do our typical deliverables, our outputs as part of the building design process, but also being able to go into further things like analyses or simulation or other things, right? But also think about BIM too as encompassing new skill sets, right? You've probably got some new roles and responsibilities at your organization to handle BIM and the information that you're creating and sharing. So it's the larger organization of tools, process, and people. Okay. I think we have a poll question that we want to get into as well, just to kind of understand where people, why are they using BIM? Okay.
Yes, I've got that poll question right here. Sorry, it skipped ahead a little bit. And I'll go ahead and read out these options for everybody. So our question is, why are you using BIM? It exists, we're following a trend, my project collaborators are using it, my owner requires it, it's going to get us more work, it's going to get us more money, it helps us produce better work, it's what our staff want to use, it will allow us to be more innovative, or other, which you can just type in that Q&A box that you see on your screen.
I don't know if we'd set this up to be multiple choice where you could pick multiple things that resonate with you. But for me, a lot of these are, maybe there's some a little tongue in cheek, but the thing is, what got you into it may be one thing that you had, but now you're on to something else. You've realized it may be different for you, or it may be changing, may be evolving. But I also think too, maybe you may be so down into the weeds thinking about making it work right for you that you aren't thinking about the big picture, right? So just, I think, keep in mind the things that are maybe the thing that's most important, or the most the most significant aspect of this.
I think
Absolutely.
BIM users range from early adopters that were on the plane while it was still being built, right, and had some challenges with that, and then there's others now they feel like they're being dragged into it, but then once they start that workflow and using it, they're just amazed at the things they can accomplish.
Yeah, and you may be, frankly, so far removed from starting this process that you forgot why you got into it, but now it's just the way you do things, right? All right.
Wonderful. It looks like we have about half of our attendees already submitted, and then we had a couple people entering the Q&A that they relate to most of these, actually. Mm-hmm. So we can go ahead and go to the answers real quick.
Okay. So I like it helps us produce better work, right? That's a great one. But I also think that tells me people they bought into this, right? They understand that this is not only the way the industry's growing, but there's a reason why this is the way the industry's going. So that's great. So what we want to cover today, there's a lot of different topics, and we're going to be having multiple poll questions because we really want to try to engage you more and get you thinking about this. So what's the point of optimizing in BIM? And when I say optimizing, it's the effort of improving how you're using it now, right? So I get something in a box, I open it up, and I have some kind of process associated with it, and I get somebody to do that process, and I get some result, right? So, but what happens after that? Getting the result and saying, okay, well, I think we can do better. I think we can improve on this, right? That's that whole idea of just trying to optimize beyond just the kind of the standard premise of why we're doing this in the first place. And then I want to talk about a little bit more about the benefits of why you need to be spending time trying to improve this, frankly, this investment that you've made. Okay. Now, obviously, there are barriers to this, right? There are things that are preventing you from spending time, making this the best that it could be possible. But if you're on board with the process of trying to improve, and I said not just the use of tools, but the process and developing models and sharing those models and managing all the content things around it, and then be able to control that for future growth and optimization, because it's not a static process. We'll talk about for us, that kind of structure where we've seen some success. I also want to challenge you about what to do next, and how to go about getting to this optimization quicker. All right. So why optimize BIM or optimize with BIM? Right? There's a subtle distinction, right? Like I have a BIM process. I want to check the performance and constantly improve it. But I also think, to me, I think maybe even a more sophisticated way of thinking about it is like you're not trying to improve BIM necessarily. You're doing things that have BIM as part of the solution, part of the delivery mechanism, and you want to optimize your practice with using BIM. All right, so keep in mind, to me, those are two different ways of thinking about it. Well, right off the bat, we think about this being an investment, right? You've made an investment on a lot of things. So, why not get the most out of it? Remember, it's not just the software you've bought, it's the workstations, the training, the overhead time for your staff and learning this stuff. When you think about the investments you've made in developing content and standards, but also ramping up your competency in work, right? That has also, frankly, may have eroded some of your margins in the past, and maybe you're just now getting comfortable enough with that as your workflow that you're back up to speed, or maybe even ahead of where you were. So again, if you've made all these investments in this process and these tools and your people doing these things, why wouldn't you spend the time to not only maintain it, continue its value, but also to improve on those investments, right? I think about buying a nice car and then not changing the oil or not getting a tune-up every once in a while, right? I mean, the nature of these things is, frankly, to kind of atrophy, right? So if we're not constantly improving things, then we're probably falling behind. Because guess what? Our competitors are out there doing these things. So just thinking about this Dodge report, smart data, and I found the one from 2017, so I feel like it's kind of relevant. Sometimes you see people present things and maybe the data is 10 years old, so this is not that old. There are a lot of people that think that they've gotten a lot of positive return on investment, but there's also some people that have gotten some negative or break even or not sure. And for me, it's everybody's gotten something, or most everybody's gotten something positive out of it. If it's, our premise is really getting more positives. Even if you think it's been a good investment, I still feel like there's more money on the table that we're not taking, right? Okay. So what are the benefits of adopting? We've maybe established some of those already, but optimizing. What are we going to get out of optimizing this thing? One of the things I think is really interesting, if you look at this Dodge data again, I'm going to go back to this, is really this idea of, how are we getting value? What did you expect to get from making these investments? I mean, if you look at this report, you might think, okay, 43% of you still have a lot more to get out of BIM. Okay, that's interesting. But if you really focus on the wording, it says that conceivably everyone thinks that they can get more, right? Because you think, okay, 29% said they only got between 50 and 100% out of its value. That's a huge margin, right? So you could argue that almost everybody says they can still get more value out, right? Can get more benefits for their investment. Okay, so how do we start doing that? Interesting enough, I think I get my little animation to work here. There we go. There are three major benefits that I want to cover here today, just to kind of going after some things. But this is also what the industry thinks are very valuable things. But you'll see that they're actually in this report very close, right? There's a lot of things that people are getting out. So there may be something that may be more important for you. But I also think this ties to really business arguments, right? So the thing is, I mean, you and I could talk about the specifics of Revit optimization with using, plugins, or having really good content that follows your standards, or doing some QA/QC. I mean, and I talk about those things in other webinars. I mean, those are really important. But I think the big picture part of this is really getting after what helps our business grow and thrive, especially in an environment that's changing. So being agile, but also really understanding the why. Why is this important? So the kind of three I want to focus on are establishing consistent, repeatable project delivery processes. Now that's actually a pretty big one, right? I mean, that's kind of the summation of a lot of the things that you're doing. But being able to templatize it, repeat it, make it a standard, have it well communicated, those kinds of things. So we'll get into that. Also, the ability to show younger staff, which I think is something that, frankly, that was an important one to me as a project architect years ago at a firm called Perkins & Will. I had just gone through a very difficult project when the first time I saw BIM, this was 2000. And I just thought of the idea of a simulation where I could see how the building goes together in 3D as a young architect. That was very moving to me. And that's why I jumped into BIM a long time ago. But I also think, too, this third one is important, and that's the ability to offer services beyond your typical capabilities. Okay? And I think a lot of you may be already taking advantage of this. The fact that I can do environmental simulations, that I can do integrated analysis of structures, that I can begin to understand building codes. I mean, there's all kinds of things, costing. There's all kinds of things that you can really pull from the modeling effort that you couldn't do in a 2D CAD-based process, or even hand drafting, which I'm old enough to have done some hand drafting. So to me, these are very important. So I want to jump into talking a little bit about the kind of the aspects of each of these, because I think, to me, some of these you may be doing, some of these things you may not be thinking of. So I want to kind of just push them out a little bit more. All right, so to create this kind of consistent and repeatable process, obviously providing teams templated deliverables. And when I say templated, it's not just that I've given them a template to do plans, sections, and elevations, or even a template for a medical office building project or whatever. It's really also about the process, right? And it's not just, and I've talked about this before in other webinars, I'm not just having a standard that says, okay, this is where you need to go. It's having a workflow built that understands who's doing what the processes are, what the resources are, what the outputs look like, and what does that mean to the overall process, right? So having those things not only built and aligned with what your team's capabilities are, but also making sure they have those capabilities, right? And extending their capabilities. I also think about the idea that if you're applying building data to the modeling, that's going to help you be more consistent and, again, moving toward an optimization, right? So instead of having content that just represents some physical object, also having data that's valuable to the process. But that thing is, you have to be intentional about that, right? So I just can't take something from a manufacturer and assume that they're motivated to provide the information that I'm also motivated to use and to provide to other people in my project ecosystem, right? So understanding what is important to your process, the data that's attached to those things, but also once that kind of falls into place, knowing that it's going to be consistent and that you're going to have, when you got good content, that's going to end up equating to some level good models, good projects, right? So it's that first step to getting to that repeatable, positive understanding of the data. All right. But I also think, too, you put some kind of standard in place, you communicate it, you got to keep measuring its value, right? I have to be able to look at how it has affected the teams, right? Okay, we're reducing rework. Okay, that's great. What does that mean to the standards? Is it what we intended? Is it a passive? Is it an active benefit? How can we continue to extend that and to do even more with those standards? Is the standards a block? Is it in the way of making sure that we're doing quality projects? I've seen some standards that have been so onerous that it actually stops people from doing their work because they feel like they're already they're already not complying, right? Or they feel like they got to spend time researching to do the right thing, and so they end up abandoning it, right? So that it's not effective. So that's the thing, trying to find that right mix. But I also think too that we're not necessarily taking advantage of the fact that we could automate some of these processes. And I think a very easy, low-hanging fruit version of this is kind of model checking for not only errors and omissions, but also consistent practices, right? And that's, to me, not only during the project, but after the project, that then can fold back into the system. So we're either going to learn things about our people, process, or technology from measuring our successes and failures on a particular project. But the thing is, and the thing I want to get across is that stuff can be automated. I mean, look at a simple one, something like the errors and omissions. The warning system in Revit, right? And it tells you, okay, here's how many errors I have. Well, those things are passive. They're not meant to stop you from doing things. And they pop up and they keep a running log. But if I analyze those and I use those, and then I make some countermeasures that then steer people in the right direction, then I might have less issues. Because often a lot of those errors are related to inconsistencies that you've introduced in the project, frankly, because of human error. But also, too, if you don't plan to have something be repeatable or be consistent, then that's also an error, right? The lack of doing something is also going to hurt the project. Okay. Now, just thinking about what the industry's been thinking about this as a lot of these benefits, and I think a lot of these tie back into that consistent and repeatable process. And that is said, reducing conflicts, field coordination for construction. So the CA work that you're doing, construction administration, thinking about communicating this data, but also too, think about visualization, 3D visualization, being able to do more sophisticated and comprehensive charrette pinups or other things, but also trying to communicate to a partner a detail in 3 dimensions, or having materiality, or all this extra stuff that's apart from just having a single 2D diagram is helping make our process more consistent. And eventually said, reduce construction costs, rework, and all these other things. Okay. So another important aspect that people saw as benefits that they want to go after was improving the ability to show younger staff. And I mentioned to you earlier that as a young architect, this was very important to me. Being on a project where you have to use a rain mitigation or water mitigation, moisture mitigation strategy on a project, because the detailing is so complex, and you've got to get a third-party consultant to understand how the flashing works on a particular pier or something, because you've got it built so complicated. I mean, understanding that in 3D was huge for me, right? Understanding all those things and not just a bunch of diagrams that I kind of had to assume together. So I think, to me, the premise is to get people to understand how buildings go together. Now, we may not be doing a good a job at that as we need to be. Still, because it takes experience, and it takes more experienced staff to be able to show, okay, this is not just a 3D model. This is going to be a building, and it has real world consequences, right? Not only cost, but how it sheds water, all the kind of things we were talking about. So obviously, the geometry helps coordinate. Being able to understand, okay, we got a problem with a clash or something, running across systems that may have been difficult to understand from 3 or 4 different 2D drawings. Now in 3D, maybe I've got a better angle and can actually maybe even make decisions ahead of it being a problem on drawings, right? So that's a very important positive. I also think too, a lot of the tools that we're using are geared toward the workflow. I mean, if you pull open the Revit ribbon and you look at the tools, I mean, they're very archetypal, right? You got doors, you got windows and columns and things. And so, the software development's not perfect. Having been a part of that for a long time with Revit, there are things you're always debating. Okay, what is the way the industry needs to do it? But that was the intent. And so a lot of things I think have made in place where it really makes sense to understand that even though I may be equating it to drawing a line or an arc, it is so much more connected to the actual building process. So I think that's been an improvement with BIM. Content being configured for industry standards, I think is important too. And part of that's back on us, right? Because we need to evaluate that. It's one thing for us at a manufacturer to have something, but it's also things that we build on our own and we put our own data, our own properties into. So, why wouldn't we connect with what the industry standards are for things, right? And I think to me, it's sometimes we take the easy way out in our process by picking something graphically significant, but not necessarily informationally significant, right? A great example I had with a customer recently is that in their early schematic process, they have a placeholder elevator that they throw in, and it looks great graphically on a really schematic plan, but then the technical architect that's going to be picking it up in late DD and early CDs says, well, this is not accurate because it's not tied to real world sizes. It's something that she's going to have to replace later on. So how do we optimize that process? Well, could the content be both things? Can it be graphically pleasing and an easy, simple placeholder early in the project, but then grow to have more detail? And the answer is yes, but you got to be intentional about having that content, building that content, and understanding that it changes over its life in terms of the information it's showing, but not necessarily the aspects, the properties of the physical built object. Okay.
So Lance, a common theme that I hear from my customers is, especially right now, post-pandemic, is trouble hiring people and getting new people on board. And so if they're optimizing what they're doing with BIM and taking all this into account, is that going to help them then to bring those younger staff members or new staff members up to speed more quickly?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, because I think to me, one of the things that I hear the most, like you, is onboarding, right? If I'm having trouble getting staff that will work and do the work, obviously it's a challenging market out there right now. How do I get them quickly up to speed? How do I transfer my experience from doing this work from day to day so that I can have confidence that they're going to be working right alongside with me? And I think that goes even to this fourth point about projects being shared with multiple team members. It used to be, you'd throw an intern like me into a closet and I'd work on bathroom details all day, right? And I wouldn't really see the big picture. And every intern kind of goes through that process when they're right out of school. But the challenge is, how do you start to get them into the overall building process? And I think BIM really dissuades people from being siloed, because you're in this database together. And so decisions that you may make, good or bad, are going to influence other people. But the thing is, everybody's got eyes on what you're working on, right? So when you're building a piece of the building, designing a portion of it, no matter how you may feel it's insignificant, it's still part of the bigger picture, and therefore can be accessed. And then, you've got the opportunity for teachable moments. Like, I see you working on this piece of the building, and I think you need to think about this aspect, because it's right there in front of everybody. It's not these little different siloed 2D diagrams that you kind of then, right before a deadline, smush together into a document set, right? So I think that goes really well with trying to onboard people into your process and how you do things, and be able to keep an eye on the work that they're doing. All right. Let's talk about offering services here a little bit. When I say offering services, I think, to me, if you were to take BIM, all the tools, and you've done some processes like documentation, maybe you're doing a little bit of analysis to help you become a better or make better decisions as a designer, you're gaining a lot of value from that. However, there's still something lingering out there, is the idea that all the stuff that you're doing now, because it's integrated and has some additional technology capabilities, that potentially you could be doing things that you haven't had the ability to do before you got into BIM. And I think, like, to me, the first one is enhanced project coordination, right? The fact that I can share things more often and easier with people, but also work alongside them based on workflow, right? And I think, to me, if you go back to the kind of the old method of coordinating, say, between architects and electrical engineers, like let's say we're doing a reflected ceiling plan, and you think, okay, architect's going to lay it out like they want, the electrical engineer is going to come back and modify it based on the need for particular performance in lighting for that space, right? And then it's going to be some kind of compromise between the two. Well, now with kind of building information modeling, where they have the ability to, maybe one person owns the drop-in ceiling and another group owns the actual lighting fixtures, and that we can coordinate real time. Maybe even we're having a coordination meeting, we're throwing that up on screen and kind of working through some of these aspects. So, to me, that kind of idea of getting to the truth without kind of this linear handing back and forth. I mean, we still do some of that stuff. I feel like there's much more capability of understanding what the implications are for these things. Visualization, obviously, is a big one. I mean, it used to be that you would take a totally separate process from your design work for doing documentation, and you do some kind of visualization. And the thing is, having to do those two parallel things and then talk to each other was very difficult. I remember being in a meeting one time with my client, who happened to be a Catholic priest, and was pointing out the fact that my drawings were different than my 3D rendering. And you think, oh, well, they're never going to notice. Well, he noticed, right? And the problem was that they were two different processes, two different sets of technology, and frankly, two different things. Well, now we have the ability not only to create a model that can produce documents, it can produce coordination and other things, but it can also produce visualization, right? And so they're not two different processes, two different things. They're the same thing seen in different ways, right? So to me, that's a great benefit for additional services and being able to optimize this process that you're doing. Of course, we all know about environmental analysis, structural analysis, being able to do solar studies, being able to do code analysis. That's one that's been kind of around for a while. There's even more sophisticated tools where now we can start looking at, with computational design, something like setbacks and how that influences things, or changing the program to have some different adjacencies and that ripple through the project. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we've been able to create additional processes just around understanding what it is that we're simulating, which I think is pretty amazing. The thing is, does that not only have value for you as a design firm, does it also have value for an owner, right? And I think, to me, that's where you start getting into something like being able to create a digital twin, which is, kind of the popular term in the last couple of years, where people are thinking about, I want to create, I'm going to use a model to create the building, but now that that's done, I still have this model. What can that model do? Well, could a facility manager then take that model and do things with it, like building controls or asset management or kind of life cycle maintenance, whatever it is it's interesting to them, that frankly saves them money or makes them money, right? The thing is, who starts this? We do. We as designers build these models, put these together. So why couldn't we continue to be involved over time and continue to get value even after the building is occupied, right? So that's where I think, to me, about optimizing your use of BIM as a workflow and technology, but getting people to buy into additional uses, which I think are really important. Okay, I think we're ready for another poll question.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Our next poll question is, how has BIM not met your expectations? Not seeing as many benefits as we planned for. Our work takes longer than it used to. We've been spending a lot of time fixing model issues. Our project collaborators are way behind or ahead of us, or other. Just enter that in the Q&A box. And we'll give everyone a minute to type in their answers.
Chris, what do you hear from your customers about some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there would be one other positive one, like, yeah, it has met our expectations, or maybe it took a little longer to get it set up. You know, like you said, not doing the work now, but maybe the getting up to speed on it at the beginning. But yeah, I feel like there's people that really avoided the BIM workflows for a long time, and then once they started doing it, they're like, well, this is pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do we have
They
some?
Still want that easy button.
Yeah, absolutely. Kaylin, what are we seeing as some entries? And I see some ideas in the chat. I mean, the collaborators is a big one, right? Because there are times when you've got a process honed in really well, and then you've got an owner who says, "I need you to use this consultant," and that consultant is not in BIM at all, right? Like I remember doing a lot of hardware consultants, or maybe it was a kitchen consultant that was just doing 2D, and so you had to kind of make a separate process for them to be able to work in your workflow, which was really challenging. And I also agree with Carrie about this idea of there's a lot of time in building templates and standards and those kinds of things. The thing is, to me, that's part of the optimization, but often sometimes you I don't want to say you over standardize, but I've seen a lot of people that will build this very complex infrastructure, and they haven't aligned that with their team's needs or capabilities. So sometimes it ends up being, the two extremes is like, I'm not working on my standards at all, or my templates at all, or I've got so much work in there that it becomes its own project and it's not really benefiting or not getting the return on investment in that time back into the process, which I think is real important. So can we see some results?
Absolutely.
Okay, so top two here. Work takes longer than it used to. Okay, that's a big one, and that to me signals a lot of potential optimization. So why is it taking longer? Is it because we're building up our capabilities and talking about building templates and content and those kinds of things, getting skill sets? Is it not tracking some of the performance, the benefits that we're getting elsewhere, or maybe that we're not getting those benefits that we thought we were getting? I mean, that's a pretty important. But also, too, that second one, or that's just as important, that fixing model issues. Okay, well, that to me, if your workflow is not cohesive enough to have some measures and countermeasures for how things are supposed to be done, and that ends up generating issues that frankly are model issues and not design issues, right? Then you've got work to do on optimization. So we can talk a little bit about those. Thank you. All right. So what are barriers to optimizing BIM? And I have several here. Obviously, the simple ones are like, time. Like I have to put non-billable time to build these processes and skill sets and templates and all these things. It's hard to, if it's not built into the project scoping, which you don't want to do, then it is going to be overhead. So who does that? And so often this stuff gets neglected over time. And you just think, I'm going to take the best of what I'm doing on the day-to-day project work, and I'm going to try to shoehorn that into a set of standards and content. So time is a big barrier. Cost, right? It takes money to buy these things, tools, workstations. Not as much as it used to be. Tools are not, relatively compared to kind of the investments on those things. To me, it's the staff. Getting experienced staff, holding on to that staff, retaining them, right? But I also think there's another challenge in that, and to me, that is that, and why I'm kind of highlighting this. Changing people is a big one, right? If you've had success in doing 2D and then suddenly now you're trying to have success with 3D, and there are people that are questioning, well, why do we need to do it differently than we did, right? If it wasn't broke, why are we fixing it? Well, the thing is, that argument's been made since we've been a civilization. Why do something different? There's benefits. Here are the benefits, and here's why it's going to be beneficial for the organization to do these things, right? But the thing is, you have to take the time to understand why people are worried. So let me jump into this, because I think, to me, this is probably the biggest barrier, and I said that's people. I mean, the thing is, we really have to kind of become agents of change. I'm going to say we, leadership. Right? You're a BIM manager, you're a project manager, you're a director of engineering or architecture, or you're a discipline lead, whatever it is. People are looking to you to not only share your expertise, but also set direction, set expectations on how we're to do our work. And so this premise of, hey, we're going to change the way we do our work, you really need to get some buy-in from people. And I've spent a lot of time with customers trying to not only understand, how to communicate the changes that are being made, but also being able to get people to make the changes with us. And to me, that's an important aspect of this. You're not going to build standards and templates and you're going to throw that at people and say, do these things, use these things. You're going to have to get them to understand, here's how it helps you. Here's how it makes your job easier. Here's how we intend it to work, because we want to do better design work. We want to have less rework. We want to have less issues during the construction process, whatever it is that we're trying to do for the benefits. But also get people to help you build these things, right? Getting young interns to help you build some of these standards and content. Getting older staff to be able to connect in with the models to understand how they need to mentor and coach the younger staff through this process. All those things are pretty important. And I'm not going to dwell on a lot of this, because this to me is kind of, change management in general, which I would urge anyone to look into how to get buy-in and how to change minds and hearts over time. But I think some clear things here. Have a clear vision and be able to share that. This is the intent for us using BIM and why we need to perform a certain way. Be patient. Just don't assume that people are going to pick this stuff up automatically. But you also have to keep them thinking about it, always being aware this is something that we're pushing, that we're changing. I also think too, frankly, confront when you've got problems. If someone's not performing, or if a team is not meeting expectations, we have to have a hard conversation about what's the challenge, what's preventing us from doing these things. And sometimes, they haven't bought into what you have thought, and you've got to change tactics. Or maybe there's some other kind of factor that you need to be aware of and incorporate into the strategy. I also think too that, this is not a technical revolution from the ground up. This is not the power users, not the BIM manager or coordinator's job to change the entire firm or organization to do these things. This is everybody's responsibility. But I also think people look to leadership as, the leadership needs to be involved. They need to have some level of understanding of why this is important for the organization and be able to push it that way. And of course, all these things are built on trust. So understanding that we need to be consistent and we need to all agree to go a direction and then measure whether we're going that direction. So I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Another question we've got.
Absolutely. So this question, everyone, is what do you want from BIM? Would it be more projects, more profitable projects, less mundane tasks and more design, better deliverables, or other? Which you can enter in the Q&A, and we'll give everyone a minute to enter those answers.
Yeah, I want to point to some of the chat, and I think there's some great comments in here. I mean, Jeremy, you've hit kind of nail on the head. You know, it's, to me, the biggest part of this is people, right? It's like we've got some amazing technology out there. There's some great processes the industry developed over these things, but ultimately we succeed or fail with our staff, with people who are doing this work from day to day. And they're going to make the, you know, they're going to ensure that we're successful. They're also going to sometimes fail if we haven't supported them properly. And I think that support is training them, taking time to retool. That's probably one of the number one things that I have firms struggle with, is just finding time or understanding the importance of training. And it's not just, I need to train, you know, on this tool, or, you know, I need a 1 hour thing or this at lunch. It's really understanding that there's an overall strategy or process. We're trying to understand skill sets are related to responsibilities, that people need to be empowered by doing things, and see the benefits, right? And know why it's important for them to up their skills over time. But as I said, the biggest experience or the biggest investment that you make in all this stuff is the staff, right? So, but it's also often the hardest. And, you know, part of that's the exuberance of youth and getting into technology, but maybe not knowing the why. And then on the other side, where it's more experienced, like they know the why, but they aren't necessarily willing to do something different. We've got to find a kind of a middle ground for everyone. All right. We got a couple of results to talk about.
Yes, we do. Here you are.
All right. I like this, better deliverables, but I also like more profitable projects. You know, better deliverables is a thing where, as I said, one of the intents of I know Revit is part of the development team that was supporting it early, was that we were touting the fact that, well, you know, if you build an object, then no matter how you see it, wherever you see it in a plan, a section, an elevation, or whatever, eventually a section, that it's the same thing. So if I change that thing, then the notation changes. And that simple little concept saves us a ton of time in QA/QC when somebody's going through the redlining, like this tag is different on this page than it is on that page, or that sheet versus that sheet. The thing is, you know, that simple thing is a great improvement, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many of the things that we need to be producing, you know, different types of drawings, you know, different types of schedules that then kind of relate back to, you know, whatever data needs to be shared to get this thing built right. But I also think the challenge in that is that we end up often over modeling or over producing drawings that sometimes then, you know, kind of cloud that message. So why did we go from 10 wall sections 10 years ago to 50 wall sections today? Well, we can make them easier, but, you know, just because we can doesn't mean that we should, right? So I think these are some interesting results. So how do we succeed in optimizing BIM? I know some of you are looking at some more specific examples, and I'm going to try to give you, just to me, one study for this, but I just want to hit a few things, and I know we're kind of running out of time, so I don't want to skip over this, but, you know, you need to be able to define success. What are we trying to achieve? We've already said, here's what we're going after. How do we know we've achieved something? You know, coming up with a smart goal and be able to say, here's what we want to get out of this optimization. Here's when we know we've achieved that. I also think you got to be able to track progress, right? Being able to say, okay, if we're trying to improve this thing, I want to be able to make sure we're getting there all along. And if we need to change course, we need to have a different tactic. I want to be able to see that on a scoreboard or something, right? But I also think too, you know, being able to control outcomes. So we've achieved some kind of optimization, but that's not it. That's not the end game. The end game is to be able to maintain that or continually improve it, right? So we got to be intentional about following through on what it is that we were trying to succeed. And if it's a business goal, guess what? Those goalposts are going to move every year, right? So we got to continue improving and optimizing this process with that. So when I say defining success, you know, and I said I don't want to gloss over this, but to me, a lot of that's just said, you know, determining the uses of BIM is a big one. There are a lot of companies that just, you know, you ask them, well, what do you use BIM for? And they say, oh, we do documentation and we do this other thing. Okay, sometimes they say, I don't know what you mean by BIM uses. Well, the industry defines lots of different uses for BIM, you know, and if we're using one or two of them, great. But maybe if we really think about it, we really need to be using 5, because that's going to, you know, get us more work. It's going to get us better deliverables and all these other things, right? So being able to be intentional about the uses, I think, is important. And then building specific workflows around those, right? So if you've got if documentation is the thing that is really important to you in this process, what's the workflow for that? Who's responsible? Who's checking this stuff? What tools are they using? What are the outputs? What are the steps and decisions? You know, those kinds of things, being intentional and having a workflow. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but just being able to state those as part of your standards is going to make some improvement too. And then I think you also need to define the performance, right? What is it that we intend to perform here? You know, if you're scoping a project and that becomes the benchmark for performance, then when you don't meet that, what does that mean? You go back and revamping the workflow? No, often you're just going on to the next project and hopefully it ends up better without doing anything intentional to make it better, right? So to me, that's a big challenge. And then finally, if you've got this performance benchmark and you know you're trying to improve with some kind of future use, you got to be able to measure the, you know, the difference between that, right? So if we're trying to improve the time it takes to generate a reflected ceiling plan on this square foot of a project, okay? Not that you're going to measure that on every project, but you know, maybe that's a sticking point based on the last 2 projects you reviewed. Okay, well, let's come up with and be able to measure the changes that we're making to see if they're taking root. If it's an improvement, great, we can double down on that and communicate to everybody. If it's not, we've got to do a different tactic, right? And then once we figure out what these gaps are, we have to make additional investments. And it might be just spending more time building content. It might be more training, whatever it is to bridge that gap is going to be important. Okay, and you can see the industry the past few years has been thinking about, and you can see that it's been developing over time, or what we think is going to be doing. But you know, training is at the top of the list, right? But also too, you know, there may be more tools out there in your ecosystem that are going to help you do some of these things. But again, that third one is the workflow, being intentional about how you're using these tools, who's using it, and how they're using it. Okay. So tracking progress, I just want to make a point about lead versus lag indicators. If people think, okay, you know, a lag indicator is, did we succeed or not? Okay, but a lead indicator is, well, what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to get to that success, right? Are we, you know, checking, you know, time cards? Are we looking at how much training people have logged? Are we putting in, you know, the amount of errors tracking on a project over time? I mean, all these things that then lead us to success, we need to be looking at incrementally. And that's why I say focus on the lead indicators, not necessarily the lag indicators, because the lag indicators are still important, but they're a result of your lead indicators that you've acted on. Okay, and then communicate this, right? This is important. It just can't be behind the scenes. It has to be forefront so people know if they're winning or losing on a day-to-day basis. Okay, and to me, about controlling outcomes, I just want to point out the fact that, you know, achieving your important goals, that's the first step, right? What's the next priority? It maybe, you know, it's going after another goal. I also think too that, you know, if we've missed the target, if we haven't achieved some kind of optimization, then, you know, where do we need to make an adjustment? And then we may be able to parlay that into a real optimization for business outcomes. So if the optimization is not associated with a business goal, is it a real optimization? Is it just optimization into itself, right? But also think once you've achieved something, you need to make it permanent. So it needs to build back into the standards. It needs to go back into your onboarding, your training. You need to recognize that this was an important change in your process and why you're getting the benefits, and then be able to make that repeatable. Okay? Now, I'm just going to give an example of what the way you might break all this together. So let's say you want to establish the consistent and repeatable project delivery process. Okay? So your goal might be, hey, let's reduce errors and emissions on the project or on all our projects by 10% this quarter. Okay? It means, one, you got to be measuring what it was last quarter on projects, right? So that's where that measurement process is important. Okay, so during this optimization, what kind of KPIs, key performance indicators, do we want to track? All right, so maybe every week we want to review at least one model and how they're tracking on issues, errors, right? And that could be numerous things. We may find, we find errors and we want to track down root causes for each of those. Was it a lack of training? Was it a tool problem? Was it laziness? Whatever it is, right? People not following standards. I don't mean laziness. And then we want to be able to say, well, maybe we also want to be able to train project members. So maybe you need to do a 1 hour a month study in this, in this workflow, right? And be able to show that you've learned something from it. And then, as I said, be able to track occurrences for errors and that we've actually fixed them, right? So not just that we found them, but we actually did something that fixed them, and be able to make changes based on that, right? So that's might be some common ones just to get you the right thing. And again, you want to control this by, when I say, what have we learned from this optimization? Okay, we were able to meet the mark and get 10% errors out. Well, how did we do that? What does that mean to the standards? Did we change content? Did we change our training? How is that being updated, right? How are we communicating all these to people as well? So we are just doing things behind the scenes. We're actually getting them to do something different. Okay. I know we're quite near the end. I want to just leave a couple more minutes for some time, but to even answer some questions. But I think you need to recommit your organization to using BIM. And I want to say understanding why, right? Determine what those benefits are and where you're getting value out of it, and then be able to make additional investments based on those values that you're getting, and be able to optimize and improve the use of. So you're getting more value from the things that you've invested in already. All right. I'm gonna skip this poll question because I want to just to say be able to answer any other things. But I also want to mention too, we love to keep this conversation going. We want to start a peer group with people on this call and other parts of your organization to really kind of discuss a lot of these things. I think there are other kind of peer-to-peer groups out there that talk about some of these things. I think for us, focusing on technology, but really trying to get to more of these benefits. Potentially we could meet online to have discussions, open this up where we could talk back and forth, share some of the best practices. We can get guest speakers to come in and talk about processes and workflows and other things. And then I think we need to push this back up to the creators of the software, which we have connections to. I also think, too, there's some opportunities to jump right into some of the challenges that you're facing. We have a service called BIM Management as a Service where a lot of these things are tackled, where we have experts that can come in and work on templates and build content, but they can also then train people around the workflow as well, professionals that know the software really well. We have a great learning and development system that really is geared toward custom and just-in-time training, but also connecting it to your workflow. So really understanding what you do and building training and education around that. And then you think about computational design. That's the ability to be able to automate a lot of this stuff and get through some of the mundane things so that your team can use the tools to go to what's more interesting to them, and that's the design and construction process. So anyway, I know that was fairly quick here at the end, but I want to jump over to questions, because I know we've got maybe a couple of questions out there. I see let's see if I can find a question that we can jump into. Like, well, how do you measure BIM metrics? There's a lot of different ways to measure metrics. For BIM, to me, it's about performance. So either we're doing things on a process. We're also, the tools can be measured, right? So you can measure the performance of a model, you can performance of the data, but you can also measure the performance of people doing these processes. So to me, I always think about people, process, and technology with all these things. Some of these things like doing an analysis of your time cards for people with specific roles, and then being able to compare that to, say, their training. I mean, those things are related. So that's a big question about, how do we get these different metrics out? The challenge is, defining what metrics are of value. There's a webinar I did back in the fall that addresses this specifically. So if you maybe send us a note, we can send you a link to maybe watch that if you haven't seen it. All right. I know we're about out of time. I will tell you my email address if you want to send me questions or complain that I didn't talk about something you wanted to talk about. My email address is lkirby@asti.com. Chris, do you want to give your email as well?
Sure. It's kdell, like the computer, DELL, @asti.com.
But she's better than the computer.
That's right. Yeah, I do see some great questions in the chat, and hopefully we can reach out to people individually and then also get some more people to join a peer group to continue the conversation.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, and thanks for hanging in with us rambling on about optimization.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lance and Chris, and thank you everyone out there for attending today. We appreciate you spending your time with us, and we trust that it was meaningful and impactful for you and your business. Once again, like Lance said, please feel free to reach out to Lance and Chris if you have any further questions, and we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.